When my lease ended unexpectedly, I needed a place. I was scrolling through rental listings when I found something peculiar. A room in a shared apartment. The price? Only $800 a month. Cheap for my city. The ad didn't have much detail, just a photo of the room and a name. Max. No profile picture, no bio. Just Max. I should have seen that as a red flag, but desperation made me overlook it. I messaged him, and within minutes, I got a reply. Rooms available. You can move in tomorrow. Something about it felt off, but I convinced myself it was a blessing in disguise. When I arrived, the building was run down. Peeling paint, flickering hallway lights. Max greeted me at the door, and right away, he seemed different. He was tall, gaunt, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me the key and laid out the rules. 1. No overnight guests. 2. Don't use the kitchen past 10 p.m. 3. Never, ever enter his room. Room 204. At first, everything seemed fine. My room was small but clean. Max mostly kept to himself, and the apartment was eerily quiet. Almost too quiet, but it didn't stay that way. On my third night, I woke up to a sound. I assumed it was the old pipes, until I realized it was coming from inside Max's room. I whispered to myself, just go back to sleep, and I did for now. A week later, I broke rule 2. I was starving after a late shift, so I tiptoed to the kitchen at 11 p.m. As I microwaved leftovers, I heard the creak of a door behind me. It was Max. He stood there, motionless, just watching me. I told you not to use the kitchen after 10, he said, his voice low and cold. I stammered an apology, but he didn't respond. He just turned and walked back to his room. That's when I noticed something. His door didn't fully close. From where I stood, I could see the edge of something. A black, leather-bound journal lying on a table inside his room. That journal haunted me. What was in it? Why did he keep his door cracked? The tapping noises continued every night. They grew louder, more erratic. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight, waited until Max left the apartment, and I broke rule 3. I went into room 204. The room was dark. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings about missing people. On the desk sat the journal. I opened it. Page after page was filled with names, dates, and chilling details. At the bottom of one page, written in bold letters, was my name. Suddenly, I heard the front door creak open. I panicked. I shoved the journal back and hid in the closet. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought Max would hear it. Through the slats, I saw him enter. He stood in the doorway, holding a knife. "I know you're in here," he whispered, his voice dripping with menace. As he turned his back, I made a break for it. I bolted out of the apartment and ran down the street, not stopping until I reached a 24-hour diner. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Max and the journal were gone. Turns out, I wasn't the first person to report him. Max, or whatever his real name was, had been renting out that room for years. His past tenants? They're still missing. Now, whenever I hear tapping at night, I can't help but wonder, is Max still out there? And if he is, who's next on his list? I recently took a gig as a night janitor at an old office building downtown. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep the bills paid. The building itself had seen better days. Cracked tiles, flickering lights, and a constant smell of dampness lingering in the air. It was eerily quiet most nights, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. But hey, I'm a night owl, so I didn't mind the odd vibe too much. At least, not at first. The first couple of shifts were uneventful. I'd mop floors, empty trash cans, and listen to podcasts to pass the time. Then, one night, things started to feel off. It was around 2 a.m., and I was cleaning the third floor. That's when I first heard it. It was slow, rhythmic, and just loud enough to cut through the hum of the air conditioning. I paused, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sound stopped as soon as I turned off my mop bucket's squeaky wheels. Weird, but I figured it was just the building settling. Old places make noises, right? The next night, it happened again. Like someone was shuffling their feet. It was coming from one of the offices at the end of the hall. I worked up the courage to check it out, but when I opened the door, the room was empty. Just a couple of dusty desks and an old filing cabinet. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the fourth night, the noises had gotten louder. almost right behind me at times. I'd whirl around, expecting to see someone, but the hall would be empty. The air felt heavy, like the whole building was holding its breath. I mentioned it to the day manager, but he just laughed and said, "That's just this place. It's got character." Yeah, right. The breaking point came on my 5th shift. I was cleaning the stairwell when I heard a loud bang from the basement. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even been down there yet. My training supervisor told me it was off limits, something about old wiring and a risk of flooding. But the noise wasn't something I could ignore. It sounded like metal hitting concrete. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the narrow staircase. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, and the smell of mildew was overwhelming. My flashlight beam swept across rows of rusting shelves and broken furniture. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, in the far corner, I saw it. A heavy metal door with a chain and padlock hanging loosely from the handle. The chain was broken, the padlock lying on the ground. My heart started pounding. Who had been down here? I was about to turn back when the door creaked open, just an inch. A sliver of darkness peeked through, and I swear I could hear faint breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response, just the breathing, slow and deliberate. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open wider. My flashlight revealed a small, concrete room. The walls were covered in strange markings, like someone had scratched symbols into the surface. In the center of the room was a single chair, and on it sat a figure, hunched over and completely still. "Sir?" I tried again. No movement. My flashlight beam wavered as my hand trembled. I stepped closer, and that's when the figure's head snapped up. His eyes, they were hollow, sunken, and filled with a kind of madness I can't even describe. He grinned, revealing teeth that were cracked and yellow. Then he whispered something I couldn't understand, a string of words that sounded like gibberish but made my skin crawl. I bolted. I don't even remember climbing the stairs or running to my car. All I know is that I was shaking so badly, I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I drove straight home and didn't look back. The next day, I quit. I didn't give a reason, didn't even go back for my last paycheck. Whatever was in that basement, I wanted no part of it. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. A week later, I saw a news report about the building. It had been condemned and was slated for demolition. The reporter mentioned something about strange findings in the basement, but they didn't go into detail. Sometimes I wonder what I really saw down there. Was it just some deranged squatter or something worse? I'll probably never know. And honestly, I'm okay with that.